Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris back with you for our oldest album as we go back 40 years before we were both born, and we cover Iron Maiden's Killers album, their second full release. But before we get into that, Chris, bud, how you doing, man?
Very good. Yourself?
I couldn't be better. As we sit here. A nice long weekend for me, so I'm looking forward to that, and I'm also obviously looking forward to talking about this album, which, quite frankly, well, we'll get into it, but I'll just say this: I was very surprised with how much I actually enjoyed it. But we'll get into that. Have you heard anything this week that kind of caught your ear?
Yeah, there's a couple of new singles out that I was able to give a listen to, and also a band that I really like, Serenia. Their new album came out on Friday, Riddles, Runes, and Revelations. I haven't had a chance to listen to the whole thing yet, but the singles I've heard so far are very good. So I'm looking forward to hearing the whole thing.
It's funny you mentioned that. I actually listened to that this morning before we started recording. I literally just stopped playing it about 15 minutes ago. It's got a very almost like a modern feel to it, with like these keyboard samples that they're using and stuff like that. It's different from their other stuff. It's good. It's just different. I don't know how to explain it. It has like these. It sounds like they're going for like a more modern vibe, almost like an Amaranth, although it obviously doesn't sound like them. I don't know if you heard any of the singles, but it definitely has that kind of feel to it.
Yeah, I definitely have heard some of the singles. I know that their previous singer, who I think they probably had the most success with, Eileen, she left the band in 2016. So this album and their previous album, Arcane Astral Aeons, has their new singer, and her name is Emmanuel Zoldan. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it, or maybe they're just trying to
freshen up the sound after all these albums.
Or maybe just get a little bit more notoriety in the scene. But I look forward to hearing it, as I've always been a fan of theirs. Also, I can't remember if you had mentioned last week Warrior Path.
No, actually, I don't believe I did, but I'm happy you brought them up. Go for it.
Yeah, so this is a band. They had one previous album with Yannis Papadopoulos from the lead singer from Beast in Black. And the second album, it's not out yet, but they released a single called Beast of Hate, and the vocalist is former Lost Horizon singer Daniel Hyman. And this is just, your the kind of music you want to hear Daniel Hyman be involved with. The vocals are really awesome. And at the same time, Marius Danielson, who will be releasing a new album full of stars, which we've talked about previously, his Legend of Valley Doom project, they released a single that also features Daniel Hyman, called Stars Will Light the Way. So two tracks this week that I got to listen to, that both, and you don't get to really hear Daniel Hyman too often because he's not really in a full-time band, and Lost Horizon hasn't made an album in forever. So I just wanted to mention those. And also Nora Luhimo from Battle Beast, she's got a solo album coming out called the Nora Luhimo Experience. And this is, I don't think, based on the single, it doesn't sound like this is going to be a traditional heavy metal album. It's got actually kind of like a more of a just hard rock, even a country-ish vibe. I understand that she's going to have some more songs in that vein, just kind of doing things that she personally wants to do. So the one track, the single that I heard, Eternal Wheel of Time and Space, which is the title track from the album, it was good stuff, like different, but I enjoyed it a lot. So that's just some stuff that I wanted to mention this week.
Nice. I have to check out the last one. I haven't, but when you bring up Daniel Hyman, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up his other band, which I just absolutely loved, which was Heed. They came out with one full album and a demo, and it's some of the best work that I've heard anywhere. And that, for whatever reason, it never got quite the love that Lost Horizon got, which I can understand, but it was just so well done with his vocals on top of this, almost like an industrial metal type of sound. amazing stuff. I have to post one of their tracks this week just because if you haven't heard it, you're doing yourself a disservice. You got to hear that. Just a couple of things that I wanted to mention. I had sent to you the new single from Inglorious, which is the British hard rock band. They've been around for about 5 years, and I guess the closest thing I would say in terms of a sound is think of like a Led Zeppelin or a Deep Purple with a David Reedman type vocalist singing over the top. Really, really impressed. And it was just one of those things that I heard that like kind of right time, right place. And it just hit me like a really hard, no pun intended. So check out the new Inglorious single. It's called, actually they have quite a few singles off the album, but the latest one is called Medusa. And there was also Messiah as well. And then two other albums that I thought were definitely worth mentioning. The former band called Midnight Eternal, a New York-based band, had split up some time ago, and they've kind of reemerged with a new lineup called, or I should say, a new album and band called Everdawn. The album is called Cleopatra, and I kind of listened to it blind. I really wasn't sure what to expect or if I was even going to enjoy it because I had no idea what I was in for. I was really pleasantly surprised from the vocals on down to the songwriting. I thought it was a really fantastic album, kind of in the vein of a Nightwish with female operatic vocals on top. I don't even know if you've had a chance to hear this, but I definitely recommend that you check out Everdawn. One of the biggest surprises of this year so far. So definitely check them out. And then one other thing I wanted to mention, a friend of the show, Frank, had mentioned, we had gotten into a discussion about old thrash bands, and that's kind of like a void in my I guess like wheelhouse, if you will. I like certain thrash. I loved certain thrash, but there's just a lot of bands that I wasn't familiar with. And he had said that you have to go check out Destruction, a very, very well established German thrash band. They have, I guess they have 14 or 15, if not more, albums at this point. They've been around for decades. So I go out and I check out, on his recommendation, Spiritual Genocide. It was an album that came out in 2012. Sounds just as pleasant as the name would have you believe, but it was actually really, really well done thrash. So I'm going to post a track of theirs as well this week. I'm sure that most of the listeners are familiar, but if you haven't, and you're into thrash, Destruction isn't a bad place to start.
Good. Sounds good. I look forward to hearing Everdawn. I'm not really familiar with them, but it sounds like that's right up my alley. So I look forward to you posting that this week.
Yeah, definitely will. I think it's worth checking out. And with that, let's get to the reason why we're here. Obviously, Iron Maiden Killers, which just celebrated its 40th anniversary, at least for the U.S. release, which came out on February 2nd, 1981. Iron Maiden. I mean, we could do an entire year on Iron Maiden and its albums and its history and everything else. But I thought that this was fitting just because of the fact that it was obviously the anniversary of this legendary album. What were your thoughts when you first heard it? Because I'm not even sure that you've heard it in its entirety prior to this. I know you knew certain songs, but I'm not sure that you knew the entire album.
Yeah, I don't think I'd ever listened to it start to finish until this week. There were songs that I was more familiar with than others, but I would say of all of Iron Maiden's albums, not counting the couple of albums they did with Blaze Bayley, this album would be the one that I knew the least amount of songs from or was least familiar with. And I think part of the reason, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think part of the reason is that they don't really play very many of these songs live. Is that
no?
Would that be correct?
In fact, that is 100% correct, and it's actually something I was going to touch upon. It's got 10 tracks on there, but the only one that you hear live is Wrathchild, which they play a lot. And obviously Bruce does a phenomenal job on that. They've been playing it for decades with him, but the other songs is they don't touch. So if you go to a live show, you're not going to hear this stuff live. And that's actually one of my complaints, because I would love to see them dust off one of these, and play a song, whether it's Murders in the Rue Morgue or even the title track, which happens to be one of my favorites on the disc. I don't know why they don't go back and play this stuff, because I feel like you could give it a fresh coat of paint with Bruce's vocals on top.
I couldn't agree more. I was actually really surprised at how many of these songs were real. Like, I really, really enjoyed. I enjoyed this album overall a lot. I didn't think there was one even mediocre song. Like, I thought all the songs were good to great. I liked it a lot. I'm kind of glad that you chose this because it's definitely one of those albums that I kind of let kind of slide over the years and not really pay close enough attention to. And I've always been a big fan of the original Iron Maiden self-titled album from 1980, mostly because you're going to hear songs like "Running Free" and "Phantom of the Opera" and Iron Maiden when they play live. Those are kind of always
Staples
been
in
kind
the
of
set,
exactly.
some of them.
So especially Phantom of the Opera is like an all-time favorite of mine, especially with I actually really, really enjoy the original with Paul Di'Anno, and I kind of want to just bring that up because I think part of the reason that I wasn't really aware of these first two albums is because my introduction to Iron Maiden was through the Best of the Beast, greatest hits compilation disc that I got when I was in high school, and there were no songs from these albums. I mean, for all I knew, the band started with Number of the Beast, and so as years went on and I became more familiar, I know that like a lot of people are not big fans of Paul Di'Anno's vocals. I happen to really enjoy them. I think that it's really cool to hear Iron Maiden with just a different vocalist because Bruce is just so polished and just so good, and he's a legend in heavy metal. But it is cool to kind of go back and hear this. I mean, it's interesting to me that so I through some of my research, I realized that this album is the first album that they did with Adrian Smith, which I was not aware of. He was not on the original self-titled album. And what's funny is that after, I was working and I listened to this album a few times, and after the disc was over, my iTunes would just start playing Invaders, which is the first track from Number of the Beast. And to me, like, I didn't realize that the disc had ended until I heard Bruce Dickinson start singing. And it's when I realized that, like, Killers really is very similar to early Iron Maiden albums. It's just that the vocals are so different that it almost sounds like a totally different style, even though it's actually, listening on headphones, especially, I started to realize like this really isn't all that different from some of the songs on Number of the Beast or Peace of Mind or some of the earlier Dickinson albums.
Yeah, I agree. This is very much a transitional album for them. First of all, I thought the songwriting on the debut, I mean, let's go back to the beginning. Their self-titled album has some of their best tracks of all time, and that's big words considering how many great songs, obviously, this band has. This album, though, really took a different shape and is actually closer, in my opinion, to Number of the Beast than it is the debut, just in terms of the way that Steve Harris wrote many of these songs. And that's why I guess, like I said, I'm surprised they don't play some of it live more often. But it is, it's very much like a swing album. And there's a reason why when you hear the intro to Invaders, you feel like it's just the 11th track on this album, because it really does kind of lend itself well to that style that they were obviously going towards. Personally, I have never been a fan of Di'Anno's vocals. I am not a Paul Di'Anno fan. I like him more, having really dove deep this week into this disc. I liked it more than I thought I would, just because the songs were so good. But, when you compare him to Bruce Dickinson, who, yeah, obviously more polished, I just, there's a reason why they decided to go in a different direction. And that's obviously why they exploded when they released Number of the Beast and obviously the 4 or 5 albums that came out afterwards, some of the greatest metal albums of all time. My problem with Di'Anno, I think, is that he's kind of one-dimensional, and while he's good, I don't think he's great. He's not a bad vocalist, don't get me wrong. I just didn't think he was anything special. And like, he kind of reminds me of some of the old Riot albums, the American band. Good stuff, some really good songs, but I just never thought the vocals were that spectacular. And that's why, I would almost like them to re-record some of this stuff with Bruce just to hear what it would sound like today, because it's I feel like that sometimes when you add that extra element to it, like just bombastic vocals over the top, it would really make some of these songs pop. But to your point, not a bad song on the disc by any means.
I got almost a Ronnie Atkins vibe from Paul's vocals, especially on a song like Prodigal Son, which is more of a slow kind of like, ballad type song. I don't know that I would call. I don't think he's as good as Ronnie Atkins, but I definitely got a little bit of that. It took me a few listens before that kind of clicked with me, but I just have never really had any issue with his vocals. I mean, he's definitely not can't hold a candle to Bruce. Few people can, but I mean, it's not unlistenable by any stretch just because it's not Bruce.
I totally agree with that. I'm glad you brought up Prodigal Son. That to me was the real outlier on this disc. To me, it's more Rush than it is Iron Maiden, just in terms of like the way that. And again, this is we're going back in time a little bit because this is before Nico McBrain is even with the band. The drummer on this disc is Clive Burr, obviously, like their original drummer, fantastic drummer in his own right. But the way that he even uses the cymbals on this on that song, and the way that some of the drum fills, it reminded me of Neil Peart more than it did anything that even Nico would do years later.
I think that's a really good. I didn't make that connection, but now that you mention it, yeah, that is a very like kind of like mellow Rush type song.
And it's the kind of songs that they were writing around this time. So I wonder if it's a coincidence or if they were just experimenting, because it is a really interesting song, but it is an outlier on this album.
Yeah, it definitely stood out to me as like, I was almost like, oh my God, like has Iron Maiden written a ballad before? Because if they have, I don't think I've heard it. I mean,
and this is certainly the closest thing. And I've listened to this album, but I completely forgot about that track. And when it came on, I thought it skipped to Moving Pictures or something. I wasn't sure what happened. It was a little weird, when I heard it and I went back to it. But having then expected it with subsequent listens, I was pleasantly surprised at how much I actually enjoyed that track as an outlier. I will say that I think that the beginning half of the disc is a little bit stronger than the we'll call it side two of the disc. Just in terms of, it starts with an instrumental track, The Ides of March, which is really just an intro to Wrathchild, which is, like I said, they still play it live, so obviously they hold it in high esteem. But songs like Murders in the Rue Morgue, even the instrumental Genghis Khan, great stuff. And quite frankly, we're talking about Genghis Khan. To me, it's really just Hallowed Be Thy Name, getting you ready for it on the next disc, because it's practically the same song, at least at the end.
I got that vibe as well. I really like the drum intro to Another Life. I thought Murders in the Rue Morgue was like my big surprise track on this album, because I don't think I was familiar with that song at all.
Fantastic song.
Yeah, I enjoyed that quite a bit. I mean, just every song is great. Killers is awesome. The last track, Drifter, is a really like awesome way to finish the album. Wrathchild is a classic. I mean, I just really enjoyed this. But the one track that I'm not mentioning is because it was my favorite, so I'm going to go ahead and say it. And you probably would have guessed this, but I think Purgatory is the hit for me on this album.
No kidding. I wouldn't have guessed that. Why did you choose that? And I'm obviously we'll post that this week. Why Purgatory? I'm curious. It's not my favorite track. I thought it's a good tune. It's not my favorite.
I just, something about it. It's just it just works for me. The guitar parts are awesome. I feel like it's kind of like the track on here, which is kind of opening us up to that more melodic sound that Iron Maiden would become later on down the line. I don't know what it is about that song, but it just resonates with me. And it was one of the songs along with Another Life that I was more familiar with going into it. But listening to the album a bunch of times this week kind of just cemented the fact that Purgatory is definitely my favorite track on the album. It's just good stuff. Yeah, that's it's just that would be my choice for.
Nice. I'll say this. My biggest surprise, and I guess I'll just make it my track of the week. My biggest surprise was the title track. I forgot how awesome the song Killers is. And if there was one song that I could hear live off this disc, it would be Killers. I just was floored by how much I enjoyed that song. I don't think I've heard it in 15 years. It's fantastic.
You walk through the subway, his eyes burn a hole in your back. A footstep behind you, he landed prepared for attack. Scream for mercy, he laughs as he's watching you bleed. Killer behind you, his bloodlust is by his knee.
At least to me, it had the crunch, it had that build up. There was just something about it that I loved, and I thought it was also Paul Di'Anno's best vocal performance on the disc. Prodigal Son aside, I thought that obviously that being the outlier, but one of the things that just resonated with me, and it when I listened to the disc as a whole, you can see Steve Harris coming to life on this disc. His bass lines throughout the entire album, and obviously because he wrote most of the tracks, not terribly surprising, but you can really see why he becomes the driving force for the next 40 years for this band, just on this disc alone.
Yeah, I really recommend. So I listened to this album 5 times this week, and the 5th time, which is kind of becoming a tradition for me, I like to listen to it the last time on headphones, and it really comes through when you put on a decent pair of headphones, like those bass parts. Yeah, I totally picked up on that as well. It's just he's just like just going for it on this album.
And you can and he's maturing as a songwriter, because I think he was and don't quote me on this, I think he's about 20 years old when this album came out, so he's still a kid when this album is released, but you can see that he's really starting to develop. And obviously, and maybe that's a debate for another day. We could talk about which of our Iron Maiden albums is our favorite, and I think that would obviously opened up Pandora's box in terms of opinions, because I think everyone's got a favorite. But you can certainly see here that he's laying the foundation, and his songwriting continues to get stronger and stronger. But those galloping bass parts are prevalent on this album, and that's why it really just kind of leads right into Number of the Beast, because obviously that's present on a number of tracks on that album and all subsequent albums.
Yeah, I was expecting this to not remind me of the mid to late 80s Iron Maiden, and I was really surprised at how much that it actually did. So yeah, I don't know that I have too much else to say about this album. It's short, it's sweet, it's under 40 minutes. If you don't count, some of the albums have a bonus track of Women in Uniform, I believe, which my version did not have, so I didn't listen to that song. But yeah, I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would, for sure. Really good stuff, and I think now I can definitely put Purgatory in my list of favorite Iron Maiden tracks. I just really love the guitar parts. I don't know if it's really a solo per se, but just those like kind of guitar fills or whatever. Just my type of stuff. I really enjoyed this. The whole album is definitely worth it. Yeah, I'm glad you chose it. Because I don't
probably wouldn't have listened to it otherwise.
I don't know that I would have gone back and given it a fair shake. And to be honest with you, all it did was make me want to listen to more Iron Maiden, because for me, I'm not as familiar with their stuff as I wish I was. I'm not even sure I could say I have a favorite album, because I don't think there's one album where I'm super familiar with every track. In all honesty, I've always been kind of like a surface Iron Maiden fan, where I know all the hits and maybe some of the a little bit more of the deeper cuts. But I mean, like, there's probably more songs that I'm not familiar with than songs that I am, or maybe I'm just not giving myself enough credit. But it just makes me want to kind of learn more,
I remember when we went to see them, I guess it's got to be close to I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago now. I mean, I've seen them a bunch, but I remember seeing them with you in New Jersey when they were basically recreating the Live After Death tour, which, and I'll say it, Live After Death is my favorite live album of all time. I have yet to find a live album 35 years after the fact that competes with that album. But the reason I say that is, every tour, their set lists are pretty static. You're going to hear Iron Maiden. You're probably going to hear Run to the Hills, Hallowed Be Thy Name, and these are all fantastic songs. But you're lucky to hear 3 or 4 different tracks on these tours. And so if you just listen to the tracks that you kind of expect them to play live, you're not going to hear songs like Purgatory. You're not going to hear songs like, Where Eagles Dare for the most part. There's just certain songs that they just, not that that's on this album, but they play the same songs rather frequently. And listen, the formula is working. They sell out virtually every show that they play, every arena, every stadium. They're making more money than they know what to do with. Bruce is flying the jet to each of these shows. So they have a formula that works almost like Kiss in a sense, where they just, they print their own money. But by the same token, like I said, one of these days I would love to hear their B-sides tour, even if it meant that, Madison Square Garden wasn't packed. I would just love to hear some of like these like darker tracks or some of these tracks that we don't get to hear as much. But I think you'd be pleasantly surprised at how many songs you actually know, especially from that classic era that, kind of came after Killers.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of bands that, the diehard fans feel that way about it. I know like Aerosmith is a band that kind of is like that too, where, my sister is a huge fan and she's always saying that like the set lists are always the same. And when you know every song, you kind of want to hear some deeper cuts when you go see them live. But, bands like that are really catering to more of the general audience than the diehards, where, you're for every Pearl Jam that's going to play a different set list every night, there's 50 Iron Maidens that are going to play the same. And metal bands in general tend to play the same set list, mostly because the music to rehearse is more intricate and more complicated than say a Green Day song would be. So it's always been my experience that as far as metal bands go, the set lists don't change. But I mean, yeah, a band like Iron Maiden, they have hundreds of songs. And I mean, just think about how many songs they've released since they, reunited that classic lineup in 2000. I mean, in the last 20 years, they have a ton of songs, and that, there's people that would be happy not hearing any of that stuff at an Iron Maiden show.
I get it. I mean, if I didn't hear Run to the Hills, I wouldn't be crying. Like, there's stuff I think of songs like Infinite Dreams off Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. It's one of my favorite songs, but they haven't played it since that tour, and I'll never get to hear it live because they're never playing it. But songs like that are, to me, 1,000 times better than, as much as I love Iron Maiden, the song, and I do love it every time I hear it. Play some of the more obscure stuff. I mean, that's just my opinion. I guess I'll close it out by saying this: Iron Maiden, the best live band I have ever seen, bar none. No matter, even though they play the same stuff, it's the production is just so big and so huge, and every tour seems to be better than the last. I caught them on the last tour when concerts were a thing, and it was one of the best shows I've ever seen. And they just seem to get better with time, and I don't know how they do it because they're in their 60s now and they're running around and they're in better shape than I am. So it's like, it's amazing. They're just a fantastic band, and I'm glad that it kind of, it was an awakening for you, and you can kind of go back and check out some of the stuff that you may have missed or just may have glossed over.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen them live twice now, and both times they were doing throwback set lists. I think, like you said, the one we saw together, they were doing the what was it, Live After Death, and then
Right.
I saw them again in Buffalo, and when they were doing their Made in England tour. And that set list was really awesome too. Other than not playing Hallowed Be Thy Name, I have zero complaints about that show. That was a blast, and they really are just such a fantastic live experience. I'll never get to see Rush live, which is a regret of mine, but I'm glad that I've at least gotten to see Iron Maiden twice, and hopefully I'll be able to see them again at some point.
Fingers crossed. It's a band that I make a point of seeing every time they tour, just because I know I'm in for a treat. And I guess with that, that'll put a bow on Killers. It is. Let's just set the stage. You're going to pick the album for next week. That'll come out on the 22nd. The March 1st show, we're going to give it back to the fans who have sent in a number of requests. So we're gonna do a fan vote on March 1st. We'll do one of the fan albums, and then on March 8th, I'll go back to picking. But that'll kind of set the stage for the next 3 weeks. What do you have in store for next week for us? Because I have no idea what you're about to say.
Well, I can't tell you because you haven't rated Killers yet.
You know what? You're absolutely right. I jumped the gun a little bit. This was a solid 7 for me. It's not my favorite album, but it's something I will definitely enjoy and something I will play again. It just, like I said, to me, it's not Power Slave, it's not Peace of Mind, but it's an enjoyable 7.
Yeah, I'd give it a little bit higher. I thought it was an 8 for me.
Nice.
Yeah, but it was really enjoyable, especially this morning. I sat down and I was playing a little Super Mario Brothers and just put it on my headphones and just really got to really ingest it. And I think that it might have moved up from like a 7 or a 7.5 to an 8 just this morning, 40 years later. But
it took a while, but you got there. Now go put on Peace of Mind and come back to me and tell me what it's supposed to sound like. But
yeah,
no,
for sure.
aside,
Yeah. I mean, to me, like, the first 2 Iron Maiden albums are probably going to be like a 7 or a 7.5 or an 8, whereas, all those other albums that followed all the way up to Fear of the Dark are probably going to be closer to, like a 9 or a 9.5. And I totally understand that. But, it's this thing. To me, it's like going back and listening to Walls of Jericho as a Halloween fan and just kind of hearing that a little bit more raw, a little bit more immature, a little bit younger, different vocalist in this case. But yeah, that's kind of it's cool to kind of go back and listen to something a little bit different. I feel like it would be fun for me on a personal level. I don't know that I'd really want to discuss these albums in an episode, or maybe we would if it's something that interests you. But I think of a band like Camelot or Symphony X that had their original singer that, I mean, most people I don't even know either one of their names, to be honest with you, but
right, and it's just the production isn't quite there. It's like you obviously heard the step up when Khan joined Camelot, or when Russell Allen joined Symphony X. But the early stuff is interesting because it lays the foundation for what was to come. But it's not quite as good. I don't know how else to say it. They hadn't matured yet. They hadn't hit their groove.
Right. So, well. It's kind of a good segue because speaking of Symphony X, that's going to be my choice for our discussion next week. And the album that I've chosen is going to be 5, the New Mythology Suite, or V5, whatever. This is an album that came out in 2000. It just recently, I guess last year, was celebrating its 20th anniversary. That's not why I chose it. Actually, the reason I chose it is because I know that a lot of Symphony X fans would call this their favorite Symphony X album, and I don't. I'm partial to Divine Wings of Tragedy, which came out 3 years prior. However, I'll be honest with you, like, I've probably not listened to this album straight through very many times in my life, and probably haven't listened to it as much as I should have. So this is kind of a little bit of a challenge to myself to just kind of give it a really good, strong listen and just kind of revisit something that I might have passed up because there was other things going on 20 years ago when it first came out.
Well, I'll say this. That's part of the reason why we do this, right? It's definitely going to be a good challenge. I'll say this. I love this album. And I've kind of oscillated back and forth between this and Divine Wings for different reasons, but I will be glad to revisit this album. It's one of my favorites. And I think one of the things we may get into is, there's the old Symphony X sound. There's kind of like the new Symphony X sound, which started with the Odyssey. I have strong opinions on that. I don't know that everyone would agree with me, but I certainly have my opinions on that. But we'll touch upon that next week. And I think you made a really good choice. I'm happy to talk about that album. I have a lot of stories because I saw the band live a lot during this period, and I'll share them next week when we talk about Symphony X's 5 or V, whatever you like to call it, but the New Mythology Suite.
Yeah, it's funny because there's songs from this album that I love that I've listened to dozens of times, and then there's songs on this album that I may listen to and it'll feel like the first time I've ever heard it. So like it's kind of funny how this album is for me. So yeah, I don't know. I was just scrolling through my things and I saw this and I was like, man, something's just intriguing me about this. So yeah, I look forward to discussing that, and we'll also reveal on next week's episode which lucky requester is going to go get to be the second request album on March 1st, and that's something I'm also looking forward to. So yeah, very good.
Sounds good, man. I will talk to you soon. I hope you everyone has a good week, and we'll be back next week with some Symphony X.
All right, take care, everybody.
Thank you, bud.
Just